And there was this thing which was like non-state issued money. That's wild. Yeah, then we started a crypto exchange like that week.
Where are you looking?
Banks have this cool thing called the ability to get overnight interest from the Reserve Bank, but individuals don't get that privilege. Well, tokenized bonds are totally just smashing that barrier to entry.
Whoa, that's a thing.
Mind-blowing. So BitTrade, to go back to there, we had money at Mt. Gox, but we got everything out and we survived as a business and that was really cool, and our clients, no one lost money. No, we need to professionalize crypto exchanges because this can't happen again.
I read the Ethereum white paper. I stayed awake for 2 days straight. Gold's really gone supersonic, right? You think we might see that same correlation into Bitcoin?
You have generalized acceptance now that Bitcoin is an alternative asset and that the asset class of crypto has long-term potential.
Welcome everyone to another episode. We are talking here with an OG of Australian crypto. Yes, this man is truly in it for the tech. I've seen it myself. It is the managing director of Kraken Australia, Jonathon Miller. Work it and welcome to the pod.
Pleasure to be here.
It's just so excited today. It's like talking to an OG.
Ditto.
Tell us your story. I think because there's obviously a few OGs in crypto in Australia. There's not a lot. There's, in terms of really early days. Tell us the early days. What was it like? What did you experience?
Yeah, it's very wild, like totally different. So I got into crypto, when was it? 2013, so I was in a co-working space. I was an engineer. We had a little shop. We used to build stuff. It was really fun. Got interested in like marketplace technologies as well. And then one of the guys who started the co-working space came into the room. He was like going wild. He was like, Bitcoin. And he's a wild thinker. He's still a buddy of mine. He's a great guy. He's a brain. And interestingly, at first, I was like proper black hat skeptic. Like I was like, show me this website. And my background was in macroeconomics and economic history. And I kind of did some study in and wrote a paper on the European Union. I was like really interested in like supranational currencies, like how they went from having, the lira to having the euro and the impact and actually the kind of problem with the euro and all this kind of stuff effectively being a kind of tool of the bigger economies in Europe exploiting in a way the small ones. So I was like, interested in how money and national boundaries work. And then there was this thing which is like non-state issued money. Oh, that's wild. How could that work? That was my first reaction. How could that work? And then I started reading and then, I guess the bad software engineer in me was like, oh, this is really cool. I've never read anything about this before and got really like psyched by, and there was a cool website, bitcoin.org at the time, like had all these like FAQs, and a lot of those FAQs kind of answered my questions about how they, how they maintain the ledger. And then I got interested in blockchain and then, then we started a crypto exchange like that week because you couldn't get it. So, to your question, like what was it like? There was no, Bitcoin's crazy. It's this internet money. It exists, in the ether, so to speak. Or crypto is like quantum. It's like everywhere all at once or whatever. But it's also in wallets that are held by people. So it's there's like geographic location. So Australia, there was like so little Bitcoin here, actual Bitcoin here. So if you wanted to buy it, you were sending money to Japan, you're sending money to Mt. Gox, you're meeting up. You go to meetups. Like we go to meetups. We meet people at like the bars like down here. They were awesome. It was so cool. And I met a guy who was a core contributor to Ethereum like before it was launched. And these guys were like open source, wizards. And there was just a really great community. And that community thrives today. Like there's still a massive community, but the shape of it now is like industrialized compared to, like cottage industry, buddies who had used it on World of Warcraft, like now it's like hedge funds. Yeah. So, but there's still individuals. That whole storyline includes individuals. But yeah, there's a big difference between then and now. And it's been a really wild journey for sure.
So back in the day, I used to run one of those screensavers, which was help mine basically alien images called the SETI project. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
It literally it would mine pictures and try and find aliens and help to find aliens or other civilizations. And that idea of that distributed network really got me excited about this idea of distributed computing. And then when I saw Bitcoin, I was just like, wow, it's insane. And I remember my cousin and I just randomly started mining it on our computers just for fun. Like just
amazing.
Just like literally, let's go and have some fun. We'll go and do this thing. You know, those computers unfortunately long gone. I don't know what happened to them. And I think, you know, distributed computing, I think was obviously that made sense to me to a large degree. And I saw BitTorrent. You know, we all saw that, and that was another thing I think was quite incredible at the time. And those sort of ideas sort of connected for me. I think when I had this moment when my friend first sent me Bitcoin into my wallet, and he didn't have to wait for anyone. He didn't call anyone, and it was like 2 a.m. in the morning, and this value arrived in my wallet. I was just like, whoa, that's a thing.
Mind blowing.
Gone. I was like, okay, you got me now. What is this? Down the rabbit hole. And I read the Ethereum white paper, and I stayed awake for 2 days straight, just bent on this idea. And I was like, that's just beyond the thinking that I've ever thought. And I was so early internet, and I saw the internet, and I felt the exact same feelings when I saw, you know, I first put a web page live and I connected it up to hosting and pointed a domain name at it and I sent it to a friend, and suddenly, boom, they saw what I put on the internet. And in that exact moment, I was like, this is another one of those. And I was hooked, gone, deep.
Yeah, that's it.
And you took this exchange, BitTrade, and sold it to Kraken. And now you're the managing director at Kraken. Tell me about that transition. Tell me about building up, and then obviously Kraken's quite a big organization, and what that's been like going, you know, and working with them.
So Kraken's my first job. So, you know, BitTrade was founded by 5 people in this co-working space. And it was really just, you know, like super opportunistic moment. And then, you know, like all startups, you know, you go through, we met in, would have been like 2017, a couple of years after we started. And that's when we a bit more established. We kind of converted the business. I mean, we didn't raise money. We were not a kind of startup in that respect. It was more like a little crew. And, you know, I was still doing software, kind of blockchain-y kind of consulting stuff with these people that we'd met. I was like, this is wild. This is going to change everything. Everyone's going to use blockchain, you know, and that's becoming true now, like, but slowly. But yeah, it got to a point where the business model we created really was dependent on capital. And because we never raised money, we're like, okay, well, we need to either borrow that money, which is like not cool, or we need to kind of get investment. So we went talking to some folks, and Kraken entered the room. It was an introduction by one of the other co-founders, another wild thinker. And he made an intro, and we had a great convo with Kraken, and they said, yeah, well, we do this kind of thing. We'd like to invest in you, but also we want to come to Australia, and you guys are there. So maybe we can kind of just turn that into a thing. And so everyone who was working at BitTrade kind of came across and became Kraken people. And that was really cool. And we became Kraken Australia, so to speak. Not that we have that brand, Kraken is just Kraken, but we were the footprint here. But yeah, my experience of going from small startup, I think we had like 35 people at one point, back down to like 10 after, you know, one of the many
winters.
One of the many winters. And then... and now in a business that's, you know, 2,500 employees, and it's a different experience. However, one thing that's really cool about Kraken is that there's a bunch of entrepreneurs in there. There's a bunch of entrepreneurs in Kraken that have either come in via acquisition or been attracted to the business because of the founders. And the founders were just pure like entrepreneurial spirit. You know, Jesse, Tan, these guys kind of just exude creativity and problem solving, kind of passionate problem solvers, and there's still a kind of, I think, energy inside the business that means people like me who like that kind of thing don't get kind of swallowed into a machine. It doesn't feel like you're swallowed into a big machine when you work. Well, in my experience, like I can't speak for everyone, right? But that was a really cool thing.
What is the history of Kraken? Like how did it? I know there's Jesse, there's Tom, things. Guys, what's your story? What do you hear?
So BitTrade, to go back to there, we had money at Mt. Gox, right? And I'm pretty certain Jesse did too. And when Mt. Gox failed, we were lucky. I mean, in some respects, we weren't lucky. I think if you'd left your money at Mt. Gox, you'd still have a lot of Bitcoin today. Most people have sold it, But we got everything out and we survived as a business, and that was really cool. And our clients, no one lost money. But Jesse stepped in to kind of as just an advisor over in that kind of post-collapse period. And then he, I think, had decided he wanted to start an exchange before that. But at that time, he was like, no, we need to professionalize crypto exchanges because this can't happen again, Can't say that we solved that for everyone, but we certainly solved it for Kraken. So Kraken, was just like all in on to be the most secure exchange possible. It was all in on that. So yeah, and I think it kind of flows from there. And when I joined the company, so it was 2020, it was still pretty much an internet company. They had most people working in, Silicon Valley, and we had people all around the world, but it was like, we make software, we have that software and you can access it from wherever you are. And that's really cool. But what's happened in that kind of interim, between 2020 and today is that Kraken is now, like a lot of companies, like a big, and the beast, the Kraken beast is kind of a good morphology for explaining it. It's a multinational business with like entities in different markets and, laws and regulation. And so that transition is also part of that story. So Kraken still is this kind of hyper-focused crypto exchange doing innovative things, on-chain, off-chain, all that kind of stuff. But it's also a business that's had to react to the reality of growth and being in multiple countries, having a really complex kind of suite of products that have to kind of work together and all the infrastructure you have to build, custody, just even simple things like fiat rails. You know what that's like. Fiat rails is a big storyline for all crypto businesses, banks kind of making it hard. So even just the work that goes into maintaining access for people in different markets is just a huge part of what Kraken is. But yeah, Kraken's story is still like super dynamic, and we're still trying to make new things, and the executive and all the teams that kind of huddle around digitally, because it's a fully distributed remote company. Everyone works from home, and we huddle around these ideas and people build stuff, and it still feels like alive, which is amazing.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And in the exchange market, like just what is your analysis of that, given, there's obviously like buying spot and things like that is kind of well canvassed to some extent. I guess not for all coins, there's obviously opportunities as well. But where do you sort of, when you're looking at the market and the exchange market and competing in that, what do you sort of see, and how does that sort of, form your strategy? Where are you looking?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I think, Kraken's long-term view is that crypto needs to be adopted, right? And the exchange is part of the timeline to get to adoption. And it's a critical component, just like custody is a critical component. And so what I think Jesse was trying to do was just make sure that you have a really good exchange. Now that's an interesting business model in and of itself, and it's huge, and you've seen all this massive amount of competition around just that space, but it's not the end goal for Kraken. And so all the different pieces of the puzzle, or the tentacles, or however, whatever metaphor you want to use, all those different parts of the business are all kind of trying to push in the right direction when it comes to crypto adoption. So if you want to focus on the exchange part, I think the biggest thing at the moment is looking at centralized versus decentralized exchanges. And for a long time, and I still think this is true, centralized exchanges are more performant, and the kind of goal for an exchange is as a place of price discovery where you find other counterparties and the dynamic of a market sets a price. I still think that's best done, especially for spot crypto at a centralized exchange. But that's slowly moving. I mean, the software and the kind of cool ideas that people are building around DeFi and decentralized exchanges are challenging that. But today, really, the spot, Kraken is just like an expert at being a spot crypto exchange. It also has a whole bunch of other stuff. But I think where the business is going is it believes that it's not just about speculation. Like price discovery, liquidity is critical, but that's not the end game. And that's not the end game for Kraken. So that's why we've got Krak, which is a payments business. It's an app that lets you send money globally using crypto, but in a super intuitive way. We'll be launching that in Australia soon. We've got on-chain business, Inc. We've got a custody business, which is completely separate, but again, another critical infrastructure piece. Yeah, so there's this kind of interplay, and the exchange is a really important part, but it's not the end game.
Yeah, my experience of Kraken is just, it's very robust. It's always been very robust, very solid. Seems to be, like you said, a very high security. What do you sort of see as the Australian market, and how is it different to some of the other markets around the world?
It's definitely different. Yeah. So I've, over the last 5 years, my role's expanded from being, Aussie general manager or MD to also looking after a bunch of our offshore entities that service global client base. And that's been a really interesting journey, working with regulators who actually want to talk to you, for example, and who are innovative and that's changed now. Finally, we're talking to regulators here. But there's absolutely a difference between, Kraken's global business and any one of its markets. And in Australia, we've certainly seen some big differences. Like in Australia, people are more likely to have Ethereum, for example, by a big margin in terms of like share of wallet in an average client account. Aussies have more Ethereum than our global business, and more Sol, and a little bit more experimental. Really, actually, I think, like early adopters, frontiersmen or women or however you want to describe it, punters, risk takers. But I think my take on this is that if you look at those particular currencies in particular, Ethereum and Sol at the moment, they're like infrastructure for all sorts of other stuff that's going on, DeFi, memes, you name it. And so when you see that happening on our wallets, what you then realize is these people understand what's happening in innovation. So this is kind of evidence in my view that Australians are, and you see it in other data, are way up the curve in terms of technology adoption and well educated. And this is not just kind of crazy behavior. This is actually really considered behavior. So I think that Aussies are on the front foot, like they're ahead of the curve on a lot of areas. And we see adoption of our products here, really quickly. New stuff, cool stuff. Aussies are onto it. So yeah, it's be proud, folks. But also maybe this is also true. There's definitely a little bit more disposable income in Australia, and so people are willing to take a bit more risk and all these kinds of things. So there's lots of layers, but that's my take, is that there's a kind of smart, savvy technology enthusiast that is in Aussie.
And obviously I'm not shy of regulation, but you talked about there's differences in regulation, and I guess in general, what have you observed and what have you noticed of Australia and what's changing? Like right now, I think there's quite a bit of movement. What are you sort of seeing, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of change. And I think, what I was talking about before was about culture, in a way, like the culture of a regulatory perimeter, or the culture in a regulated environment, and a culture of a regulator. Now, in Australia, I think the last 12 to 18 months, we've finally seen some like real legitimate engagement with this industry. And that's been great, because what it's spat out is, some draft legislation and a whole bunch of other stuff, which came out today, which, I'm not going to speak about because I haven't, got my head around it yet. But there's, at very least, there's like movement at the station here. Whereas for a long time, it was just a ghost town. And so people are operating in an environment and stuff's happening and you don't know, and bad stuff has happened, good stuff has happened. So there's been like two sides to that coin, no clarity or no, the kind of light touch approach has actually been probably to the benefit of a whole bunch of innovators here in some ways. But the risk is you don't want to see that disappear, right? So that's the trade-off. But when you compare that with some other markets where their job really as regulators is to think about how they can design laws and then police those laws in a way that effectively attracts investment. That last part of that sentence doesn't really exist in Australia, because, it's more about enforcement than it is about encouraging foreign direct investment. And some people will say you don't want a regulator to be encouraging investment. That's not their mandate. And I get that. But I do think that, if you're zooming out, you're thinking about, well, what is the Australian economy? It's heavily, heavily dependent on foreign direct investment. And one way you can make sure that happens is by having a really good handle on what the future might be and think about laws with a forward-looking perspective. That's the kind of cultural difference I'm talking about. I'm not saying that regulators need to be soft and need to just like suck up to big multinationals. No. What I'm saying is you need to think as an economy, what's happening next? Let's make sure the laws that we've got or thinking about will allow cool shit to happen in the next 2, 4, 8, whatever it is, years, those time horizons. And that's just not what we do. Whereas other places, they think like that. That's a big difference.
Totally. It definitely is a different posture.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
In terms of people that are buying and selling right now, I think there's a lot of speculation about who is buying, who is selling. You talked about before institutions are buying potentially in hedge funds and things like that. And obviously that changed throughout time. Who do you think is buying and who do you think is selling right now? Like who's holding? Yeah, what's sort of your view right now? What are you seeing?
Well, part of the kind of like security parameter that Kraken has around its employees, I can't see client behavior. I can only see aggregate stuff. But what I'm seeing in the market just by being exposed to conversations and my own personal experience is that you have generalized acceptance now that Bitcoin is an alternative asset and that the asset class of crypto is absolutely has long-term potential. Whereas sometime before that, you would have criticisms that, this is all going to be a flash in the pan. This is a fad, tulip, all this kind of stuff. Not just for price, but in terms of the actual asset class. So no one really sits here and says, Bitcoin's not going to exist in 2 years. That's a huge change because what that means then is the institutional investor, which is an important part, but I don't think it's the most important part, but it's a very important part because there are people who manage other people's money. They're now in a position to say, well, maybe it's actually in my client's best interest to have some of this. And that means everyone benefits when that mindset changes. So, and that's true. I think the big nut to crack will be, superannuation. There's been one in Australia. They're managing the future wealth of a whole bunch of Aussies. You see, sovereign wealth funds and pension funds in other markets already getting allocations. Australia's lagging there. But that's the change, is that people who are managing other people's monies, which is a serious job. Like you're looking after someone else's cash. It's not yours, right? So when you make decisions, that's why they're conservative. But the difference now is when you have a conversation with anyone like that, they're like, oh yeah, Bitcoin. That's completely different. That is completely different. It's a matter of what the market for Bitcoin is, not whether Bitcoins exists or should exist, or you used to have conversations like, this is a stupid, internet meme, effectively. Yeah. So yeah, that's a big change.
I think in the market we had obviously it's almost like a slow heat. It wasn't like a sharp heat. I feel like we had a bit of a mold. We came out of this winter, we went into autumn almost for a while, and now it's kind of almost hot and summery, but it's kind of like sort of just over a long enough period of time, they're kind of like baked up. Do you think we're in the bull market right now? Like where do you think in the cycle of Bitcoin we are?
If you look at the chart, and you zoom out, there's a very, very obvious story. I'm not going to predict tomorrow, but and I think it's a good thing. I think the most important thing here is I think it's actually a good thing that it's not too hot. It's almost the last thing you want now. I think the last thing you want is this frenzy, because frenzy means people make rash decisions, bad decisions. So I actually what does it mean to have slow growth when it comes to crypto? I think it means actually people who are building, people who are creating and driving adoption, they have a better chance of success now. So I actually think that's net positive. So the long run view then becomes reinforcing. So that's my take, is that, okay, we're in a long bull effectively. That's always been the Bitcoin story. It's just, stuff in between.
Yep.
But the fact that you have so much positive sentiment with respect to, again, regulatory clarity, which has been a big problem, especially in the US. You have so much positive sentiment around the actual, adoption curve, like more and more people, new wallets, all these kind of things. And then you have huge amount of positive sentiment around the deployment of technology. So what's the most common example of deployed blockchain technology now? Stablecoins. Every single person you talk to in every single bank you meet will talk to you about a stablecoin.
Yep.
Because they have finally realized that it's like the best way to move value is to use blockchain technology. So that, old stuff that I was kind of psyched about in 2014, it's now like, oh yeah, actually, why are we using centralized databases again? So I think that all those things combined mean that I remain, really hyper positive about the technology and therefore about, the asset class in general.
And I guess talking about frenzy, golds and silver have been hitting all-time highs. And there's obviously, there's this sort of, narrative around Bitcoin being digital gold and people are trying to hedge against stocks and bonds and cash, even the US currency to some extent right now. Do you think this is, Aussies love their gold. Do you think this is, there's people like lining up around Martin Place, right, trying to buy gold, which is it's very fresh and, puzzling to me. You just buy a gold token. But anyway, what do you think this means for Bitcoin? Like a lot of people are like talking about that correlation and how, gold's really gone supersonic, right? Just to a large degree. Do you think we might see that same then correlation into Bitcoin?
Yeah. So again, personal opinion here. This is, not a financial kind of advisor, but this is how I see this kind of cultural moment, right? People are going to things like gold, I think for two reasons. One of them is just pure uncertainty, it's the big driver. And, what comes out of the president of the US mouth can change all sorts of things globally today, which is, I think it's always been true, but right now it's like super true. So, gold has always been a hedge. It's always been an alt asset class. It's also treasure. People like treasure. And so I think it's like that combo of things that is what's driving that behavior. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other analysis people have done, but that's just my personal take. I think that's also true for Bitcoin. And people, when they finally actually buy Bitcoin and like send it to a wallet, like a hardware wallet or whatever, it's also treasure because you can lose treasure, right? And so I think that there's a lot of similarities there. There's always been similarities. There's that crypto age old. Bitcoin is digital gold, so to speak. I think that people who are running and kind of rushing at gold and the physical thing are certainly frenzy is the right way of describing it. But I think the underlying reasons are real, and so I think that those things can also apply to Bitcoin.
Have you ever thought about that? Like if, there is some sort of massive collapse or whatever it might be and everyone's got their Bitcoin and, as an exchange, have you ever gone through this thought experiment? Like just hypothetically, what do you people convert it into? How do they start? What do they do? Have you ever gone to that place?
So, I mean, if you think about it, certain countries have gone through collapse. Like, it doesn't all have to be collapsed at the one time. And my new view really when it comes to macro stuff is that there's actually not one direction. There's lots of directions simultaneously. And where something's this way, there's quite often something the other way and vice versa. So if you're thinking about what it means to have a currency collapse or devaluation, we've seen that happen. And we've seen people rush to crypto when that happens. So I think if that happens on an even bigger scale, absolutely, I think that would apply for sure.
Would be wild, especially for an exchange.
Look, interestingly, for an exchange, we're so enmeshed. Kraken describes it as exchange and its kind of role as a bridge, bridging people from, fiat to crypto. And I think that in a moment like that, it'd be really interesting to understand what might happen because all the rails that, we build to allow people to deposit, Aussie dollars or US dollars or whatever the case may be, they're subject to, the rule of law, those rails. And so we're kind of enmeshed there to be able to provide that bridge. And so to a certain extent, in moments like that, you see fascist kind of force stopping people. You look at what happened in Cyprus with people not getting money out of ATMs and not be able to move their own money out of their bank accounts. And we see little kind of inklings of that every now and then in major Western economies. So I think that for an exchange that is enmeshed into the fiat rail network, we'd be probably subject to, I don't know if it'd be good for us either. I think it'd be bad. So you don't want collapse, but I think what you want is for people to think, okay, I need to be in control of my own assets. And the best way you can do that, in my view, is to have some crypto.
I think, in terms of just going on in terms of calamities and things like that, you talked about Kraken obviously being very focused on security. And there's obviously this massive rise in people talking about countries as well. I've noticed we're in Singapore as well, a whole series of other countries that everyone's talking about scams and reducing scams, phone scams, LinkedIn scams,
Infinity scams.
What kind of scams are you seeing? Like sophisticated ones, and what should we be aware of? What are you seeing?
People get scammed everywhere. People really get scammed here. And it's sad because quite often it's social engineering. It's some sort of emotional manipulation that's occurred and the person's decided to do something without thinking hard enough about it. Or they've been in some cases fully coerced, and that's different. That's a different kind of thing. It's full coercion. But in the case of a scam, there's some voluntary act that you've done and then you realize that what you've done is you haven't bought something legitimate or someone's got control of your stuff now or you've sent it to the wrong place or whatever. I think Nick Pekoko, who is the chief security officer at Kraken, he's awesome. You should look him up. He's got some great videos. We've got them on our site. He's all over YouTube and socials and whatever. He's got some really cool things. I mean, he's seen everything. He used to be a cyber security expert, private practitioner, red team, blue team stuff, all this crazy. Yeah. So, and they've done some interesting stuff too. So in terms of credentials, these guys know what they're talking about. They identified several they hacked Trezor, for example, and identified deficiencies and, patches have been deployed. And so, there's a lot of community level stuff that goes on, which is cool. And Kraken does that kind of thing. But we do it to ourselves as well because we are holding people's money. As I said, that's one of the most important jobs you can have is to not lose other people's money. So we're really careful with all of our infrastructure. And one thing that's really fun to look up is what is a cryptographic signing ceremony. Just look up some stuff on that. It's crazy. It's like a wizard kind of mystic thing, but also hyper processed and you have to do these things if you're going to create private keys. And so what you really have to think about when it comes to security is, am I in control? Firstly, do I have the passwords to my account? Am I keeping those safe? Do I have randomized passwords for different platforms? Am I using third-party software that might be, compromised? A good example of that is in-browser wallets can sometimes be compromised. Am I letting people install stuff on my computer? Am I letting people control my computer remotely? Those are the biggest red flags. And so I think Nick would say, don't let someone tell you that you need to install one of these team viewer things where they control your computer. That's immediate scam. Anytime anyone says you should do that, the answer is no. And I think that's kind of almost, it's sad because it's obvious, but it's probably the most true. And then you work backwards from there to the more subtle things. And I think it's just about being careful and then working with brands that trust. And I think Kraken's in a great position where we can say we've been around since 2013 and, we still exist. We're not a scam. So, come and work with us.
I think another thing that is probably was pretty big in 2019, probably 2021, a little bit came back, is proof of reserves.
Yeah.
And, I think this has always been a thing, right? In terms of, we've got a lot of things got called out in 21, 22, some pretty big stuff that happened, pretty big exchanges went down. How does Kraken approach this? Because, it's almost, I remember Michael Saylor was responding to, hey, show us your actual Bitcoin. And he's like, no.
Because it's a risk.
Yeah, because it's a risk, right? He doesn't want to show proof of reserves because of the security, right? That's obviously a very nuanced thing, right, in terms of proving. But I know Kraken's very positive on this, and it's something which I admire. Can you tell us about that? How does that work, and how do you handle that situation? Yeah,
so we just published our most recent proof of reserves, and every time we do it, I think it gets better. We add more coins because it wasn't all coins to begin with. So, it's the most, let's call it the most common coins and therefore the most amount on the platform we do proof of reserves for. And the way that we approach it, and I'm certainly not the person behind the technical stuff on this, but this is a very high level picture, is we actually rely on a third party to audit our attestation. And the way that we do the attestation is we use crypto tech to do it. So we use a Merkle tree. So instead of, because one of the other big problems here is you don't want to be going and telling a third party who your clients are, not because they're going to steal them, but because they could then be targeted and you get leaks. And the worst thing in the world is you want to reveal personal information about your clients. So we do not do that as part of this. But what we do is allow any individual to check if their balance matches what we have given anonymized to that third party. So we actually use private public key technology to do that. So you can like paste in your effectively identifier and you can see in the proof of reserves that it's third party audited. They've seen the wallet stack, the aggregate, and they've seen the Bitcoin wallet where the actual coins are, we cold storage, and they say, yeah, those numbers match. And then you can look at it and say, cool, well, my wallet's in that list. Awesome. But it's completely anonymized. So I think that's really smart. It's really important. And I think it's just cool that Kraken continues to do that.
If you were to explain staking in a very sort of simple way, how would you explain it to anyone who's new to staking?
Okay, cool. So, staking is a new thing in crypto relatively. And before staking, you had this thing called proof of work, which was, and you've seen probably videos of, massive data centers full of machines churning and burning CPU time. And someone came along and said, hold on. What about if we don't do that, right? And we take the principle behind that, which is, okay, what are we doing with all this burn time? We're spending money. We're locking up cash to build machines and chuck it all in this massive warehouse and burn time so that we can prove that this blockchain is real. What if we did that by putting up just pure cash instead in the token? So staking using proof of stake is where you take, say, Ethereum, and you lock it into the protocol, and the act of locking it in secures a network. And what do you get from that? Well, just like proof of work, where you get some rewards from the network itself for the transaction fees and things like this, you get rewards from staking as well because you're securing the network.
So staking is protecting the blockchain by you putting up a stake to do it.
Yeah, you're staking some risk effectively, some capital in the token itself. And that is a loss to you if it all goes bad. So you're a vested interest in making sure this blockchain is secured.
And then you get paid a yield ongoingly.
Yeah, there's a reward effectively for putting that up. So there's a same way there's a reward for investing in a hardware machine to mine Bitcoin. You get some transaction fees. You get a reward from the network. You get a reward for locking up your capital because you could do other stuff with that. You could go and invest in other things, right? So that's the incentive mechanism behind staking, proof of stake.
I noticed that Kraken, staking is obviously, I guess, because of step one, but Kraken's built this, and I confess I use the platform, and I just noticed that you got this auto sort of earn, auto stake kind of feature where you kind of like, and it doesn't have any withdrawal things, which is wild. So obviously you're aggregating that and distributing that. Tell us about the insight around that. Like who uses this? Like and what was the intention behind it?
So, on-chain staking is kind of one of the coolest things that's happened, I think. It was a lot of contest of ideas around that. And I remember when I sat down at a conference and they were talking about the potential of Ethereum go to proof of stake. It was like wild debate and how you might do it. And as an idea, I think it's really interesting, this whole proof of stake idea. I think it's just personally fascinating. But what the Kraken Earn team have built was a way for people to kind of do that seamlessly. And so, yeah, you buy a stakeable asset, it's staked now for you. Because the risks of slashing, because we run our own nodes, are like so crazily low that we think it's a net positive idea for people to get exposure to that. But this is still like an emergent area. So we'll see, what the feedback is from clients. But I think that most people who are buying these things like, proof of stake algorithm tokens like Ethereum and Sol and things like this are like already very much aware that that's how the network is secured, and how, being part of a node to secure the software that you're interested in is just like, in a way, like the biggest no-brainer ever. So from a technology point of view, I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think what I observed is you have some coins and the rewards just come in. You just turn the feature on, and it's so smooth. Like obviously you're aggregating the different time differences between people on staking, and you're just handling all that back end. It feels like that's bringing it's an incredible value prop to people who hold coins on exchange, like, and bridging that gap. Again, you're talking about like, getting people to make crypto every day. This seems like one of those features. Are there others sort of that there's Kraken and things like that as well, but are there other things that, other thoughts or, that are coming up in the future? Like what else are you thinking?
Well, I mean, this one's not as relevant for Aussies today, but I think Xdocs is another really interesting one. So they just announced a partnership with Telegram. You can buy Xdocs on Telegram now. So what are Xdocs? That is a tokenized security to a certain extent. It's a crypto version of your major publicly listed companies, ex Tesla, ex Apple, ex, you name it, ex Amazon. You can buy these tokens, and the tokens are through a third party called Back that we've done a partnership with. They are the ones that manage the underlying relationship to the security. But Xdocs is a technology, and the technology means that you can trade these things or buy and sell them on the best internet infrastructure that's ever been designed, which is blockchain. So you can, in Telegram or on, DeFi protocols or on Kraken or wherever you want to do it, you can buy or sell these, or you can send to your friend some equity. And I think that this idea that, and I actually used to talk about this ages ago, which is that you kind of get this thing called ubiquitous liquidity, where everything, for a long time, things like buying or selling shares, there's massive time lag between you selling and then getting your cash. And then there's another lag, which is that if you don't have enough money in the US for a long time, you couldn't get stocks at all. But businesses like Robinhood have solved that. But I think what Kraken's solving is access. It's an access barrier that's just kind of been squashed to the ground by blockchain. So if you're in, Colombia or whatever, and you want to get access to these products, you can on DeFi and whatever the case may be. But Xdocs is the technology that lets you get access to where you otherwise would have to deal with a whole bunch of transfers of money internationally, or platforms that don't onboard you because you're not in the right place, or whatever the case may be. So that's a really cool one as well.
And I think, there was it was tokenizing everything was obviously spoken about for quite some time, but actually it seems like Kraken's really taking that next step. And tokenized stocks, I think, that's a killer use case. And like you talked about before, stable coins as well. And what do you think sort of in the next 1 to 5 years, what do you think is coming up in crypto? I talked about tokenization. What do you see? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I think I have to agree that, the adoption story is about tokenization. Like, that's the umbrella term. What does that mean though in practice? It means that more and more interactions that you have are going to use this infrastructure as the baseline for what how you build. And anything that has a transfer of value associated with it will be using blockchain. So I think the really big kind of areas for like hypergrowth are absolutely, traditional asset classes like equities, and people talking about, more and more tokenization in bond markets, for example. And there's a really kind of crazy innovation, which is that banks have this cool thing called the ability to get overnight interest from the Reserve Bank, but individuals don't get that privilege. Well, tokenized bonds are totally just smashing that barrier to entry. And I think that that's like truly disruptive. So I think you're going to see more and more disruption. And I think that's just like super exciting. So that's the financial side. And then you've got the whole universe, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, of other industries. But even just in that world, I think there's the next 5 years, you're going to just see more and more of that. And then, everyday kind of usage of crypto, I think I'm excited about as well. Like I hate saying to people, or I hate when people say to me, oh, crypto is just about speculation. I totally don't believe that. And so for the next 3 to 5 years is going to completely smash that perspective.
One of the things I wanted to sort of end on to some extent is from your journey. I think everyone in crypto kind of has this moment when you're like, whoa, that you click the buttons and then something happened. I'd love you to share that story. But I think what I'm interested by it as well is like then and I think what happens is it shapes your view of crypto. Like you always come from that first lens, that first principles, that first experience, and it affects the way you see projects, affects the way you make investments, what coins you buy, things like that. I'd love you to hear what it was that experience, and then how did that affect your interactions with crypto?
Yeah, I think, to go back to that previous story, when I first was introduced to Bitcoin, this idea that you could have a non-state issued money was just like mind-blowing, and that it would work. Because you haven't been able to do that. No one has been able to do that until Bitcoin came along. As in So that was still mind-blowing. So I still think for me, there's that kind of power, the disruptive power of that, I think is yet to be fully realized still. And that is still like a massive and most informative kind of, I guess, formative in a way, moment for me. And then the other one was Ethereum. And when I sat down with one of the guys who I'd met at a Bitcoin meetup and he was talking about Ethereum. Yeah, he was talking about, being an open source contributor to it. And the idea that you could extend the principle of Bitcoin to anything, basically, within reason, but anything digital. And the idea of a distributed compute and distributed and decentralized compute, that was also mind-blowing. So those two things still inform me today. Like they still are the kind of core of what I get excited about, which is ultimately like the technology. And that light bulb went off in a bunch of folks, but I think you'll just see that light bulb will keep going off.
I agree with you. I think it's some of the stories that were told, in 17, 18, and I think we saw it particularly the 21 narratives then coming true in 24. It just took quite a while. Things like Pendle, things like, restaking, a whole series of things took a long time to come alive, but then, completely agree with you. And I think your longer term arc here of self-sovereign money or, that's a big arc. And I agree with you. It hasn't played out. I guess for everyone watching as well, if you haven't noticed, we've got the most incredible mouse pads here. They're actually mouse pads. They're not yoga mats, but these things are like just butter to the hand. And for any crypto trader, I don't know how you get one of these. These are Kraken.
We can do a giveaway.
These are Kraken. Yeah, we need to do a giveaway because these are the best mats. Because in crypto you got all you're scrolling. You're at your desk all the time. You're eating something, and your hands are on the table. And this is just butter to the hand when it comes to crypto trading. Just want to shout out, for this innovation for anyone who's watching. These are Kraken mouse pads.
They're Kraken.
Yeah,
they are Kraken. I agree.
So maybe we'll put a little giveaway together or something. So do watch this space if you're listening to this right now. But that's what these are. If you were wondering when you're watching
desk plushie.
Desk plush.
Yeah.
It is just, they are just delightful. But and with that, Jonathon, I wanted to thank you for coming on, unpacking where things are going, and sharing everything there is about Kraken and your story, and deeply appreciate and love what you are contributing and have contributed to the space.
Likewise, thanks for having me on. It's been awesome. Great to see you again, man.